So here in the counter component, we're using props to initialize the state. One of the things that confuses beginners to React is what is the difference between props and state. So in this lecture, I'm going to clarify this. Props includes data that we give to a component, whereas state includes data that is local or private to that component. So other components cannot access that state. It's completely internal to that component. In other words, if we go to our counters component, this is where we're using the counter component. All the attributes that we're setting here, these attributes are part of the props, the input to the component. We cannot access the state of this component. The state is local and internal to that component. Similarly, this counters component has its own local state, which is completely invisible to other components. Now, sometimes a component may not have a state. It may get all the data that it needs via props, and you're going to see that later in this section. One more thing you need to know about props versus state is that props is read-only. In other words, we cannot change the input to this component inside of this component. Let me show you. So if we go back to our counter component, here in handle increment, I'm going to change one of the properties of the props object. So this.props.value, I'm going to set that to 0. Let's see what happens when we click the increment button. So here I'm going to click this button. We get this error, cannot assign to read-only property value of object. So React does not allow you to change any properties of the props object. It's purely input to a component, and we should not modify the input. If we need to modify that input during the life cycle of a component, then we need to get that input and put it in the state. In this case, our counter component has its own local state, so we can modify this value in our handle increment button as we have done here. So let's delete this line. Next, we're going to talk about raising and handling events.